Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on help desk best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in this webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few short administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I'll pause once during the presentation to answer your questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. The presentation usually goes about an hour and a half, so for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 Eastern Time. Finally, just a quick word about MetricNet before we get started. I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today. But for those who have not worked with us before, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas and complete more than 300 benchmarks a year. My role in the company, along with that of Eric Sikowski, who some of you have met, is to manage the help desk, call center, and desktop core benchmarking projects at MetricNet. The work we do for help desks worldwide really spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the help desks that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve those objectives through benchmarking and customer satisfaction surveys. By the way, we use the term help desk throughout the webcast, despite the fact that many of you run a service desk according to the ITIL definition. We're of course aware of the differences between a service desk and a help desk, but for the sake of consistency and simplicity, we use the help desk terminology throughout. One final note, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of the presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's just 2 questions long, and it takes less than 10 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, if you have any questions at all during the webcast, if you have difficulties at all, please contact us in one of 2 ways. You can email us at info, I-N-F-O, @metricnet.com, or you can call us in the United States. About a third of you logged in today are logged in from outside North America. You can call us at this number, 202-321-5760. So again, if you have any difficulties at all during the presentation, this is how you can reach us. Email us at info@metricnet.com or call us at the number that I'm showing here. And once again, if you have any questions during the webcast, there is a dialog box that appears in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can type your questions in there. I will pause once during the webcast to answer those questions, and then at the conclusion of the webcast, I'll answer any remaining questions that I didn't get to during that first Q&A break. Now, on today's agenda, there's 3 items. 4th item about MetricNet we're not going to get into today, but for those who are interested, there's plenty of information at the end of this presentation and, of course, on our website about the products and services offered by MetricNet. For the purposes of this webcast, we're going to start with a historical perspective. I think it's important for everybody to understand how support is evolving. This isn't just a service desk, it's also desktop support. How it is evolving into a much more strategic activity. If you understand those underlying drivers of why support is becoming more strategic, you're going to be in a position to take advantage of those industry dynamics. So we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about how the industry is evolving. But very quickly, we're going to get into our model for help desk best practices that addresses support strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and then marketing, which is really about managing stakeholder expectations. And we're going to conclude with a call to action. I'm going to give you some pointers, some tips, if you will, on how you can immediately put today's insights to use in your own support organization. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about what's going on with the industry. MetricNet has been at this now for 24 years. And during that period of time, we've completed more than 1,900 service desk benchmarks. In fact, we're rapidly closing in on our 2,000th service desk benchmarks. So everything you see in today's presentation is empirical in nature. It's not the result of some theory. It's not the result of some academic exercise. It is based upon what we see in the industry day in and day out. It's based upon what's working in the industry. And what we're trying to communicate to you are those practices that consistently show up in those support organizations that exceed customer expectations, that deliver world-class service and support to their many customers. As a result of these nearly 2,000 benchmarks, we've developed a global database of process and performance indicators. We've got 30 KPIs, key performance indicators, in our database, everything from customer satisfaction to first contact resolution rate. And we have also documented and identified nearly 80 industry best practices. Now, our full 2-day best practices seminar goes on, well, like I said, for 2 full days. And what I've done here is I've distilled this down to 90 minutes to the best of my ability. And what we'll be doing is sharing with you what we believe to be the most important success factors for world-class performance in a service desk or help desk organization. There are 80 industry best practices. We won't have time to go through all 80 of those. As I mentioned, we have a 2-day seminar on that. But what we're going to be doing is hitting the highlights of those industry best practices. Now, it's instructive to look at how the industry has evolved during the time that we've been active in support work, support consolidation and assessment and benchmarking. And so what I've shown on page 5 are a handful of key performance indicators that tell a very interesting story about how this industry has evolved since 1988. Let's look first at the number of contacts per end user. This is the number of times the average end user places a contact to the help desk or the service desk. It might be an email contact. It might be a voicemail. It might be a direct voice contact. It might be a web chat. But back in 1988, they called less than once a month. It was about 0.8 contacts per end user per month. Last year, that number was almost 2. So it's more than doubled in the last 24 years. The reason for that is because the average knowledge worker has a lot more complexity on their desk than they have before. The average knowledge worker has more than one device. They might have a laptop computer, a desktop computer, a smartphone, a printer. There could be a lot of things that require support, but not only has the number of devices proliferated, so too have the complexity of those devices proliferated, and that results in the need for greater service and support. So last year, the average end user contacted their help desk nearly twice a month. The cost per contact during this period of time has grown from about $10 per contact to almost $22 per contact. One of the primary reasons for that is because the handle time has gone up. It's gone from about 6.5 minutes in 1988 to just under 13 minutes last year. Now, the reason the handle time has roughly doubled, I've alluded to already. It's the fact that the average user has more complexity on their desk and on their belt and that they carry with them than they have historically. As a result, the resolution times have grown a bit longer. They've almost doubled in the last 24 years. But here's the real reason that the handle time has increased as much as it has. It's because the first contact resolution rate has gone up so much. In 1988, only 35% of inbound contacts to a service desk were resolved on that initial contact. But as companies came to the realization that customer satisfaction is driven by first contact resolution rate, they invested resources in training and technology tools and processes that enabled them to resolve more contacts on the initial contact with the user. And as a result, over 24 years, the FCR, first contact resolution rate, has gone from 35% to 67%. It is nearly doubled. Now, that's the reason you see an almost doubling of handle time in addition to the greater complexity. And this is also why you see an increase in cost per contact. But this does tell a very interesting story. Back in 1988, most help desks were basically log and dispatch, or bag and tag as they were called, or message-taking services. They would resolve password resets. They would answer simple questions about Microsoft Word and other desktop applications. But by and large, anything that required any complexity or expertise ended up being pushed out to desktop support or level 2 within IT, or possibly even a vendor. But once again, as organizations began to realize that FCR is what drives customer satisfaction, and you don't have to take my word for that. I'm going to show you some evidence of that later in this presentation. They began making investments to improve the FCR, and the industry, by and large, has been pretty successful at doing that. It's still not as high as it ought to be, but FCR has increased fairly dramatically. Now, a closely related metric is resolved at level 1, or FLR, first level resolution rate. Now, you can resolve something at first level that isn't resolved on first contact. Let me explain how. If a user calls in and you can't resolve their issue when they're on the phone, it requires perhaps some research or perhaps something that you have to do online before you resolve that contact. You still resolve it at level 1. You just don't resolve it on first contact. So FLR is always going to be greater than first contact resolution, greater than or equal to first contact resolution. And this is also a very positive trend because first level resolution rates have gone from just under 40% to about 85% last year. This is positive because the higher this number goes, the more you resolve at level 1, the lower will be your TCO, total cost of ownership, for end user support. I'm going to explore that theme in a little bit more detail momentarily. But for now, it's important to recognize that FCR and FLR have both gone up fairly dramatically. This is a good thing because FCR drives customer satisfaction, and first level resolution rate drives your total cost of ownership for support. Now, if we look at starting agent salaries across North America, this is an average. They vary quite a bit. The variance on this number is huge. If you hire a level 1 service desk person in Sunnydale, California, chances are you're going to pay them $50,000 or $55,000 a year. If you hire a level 1 service desk person in Biloxi or Pensacola, Florida, for example, you can probably get that person for somewhere around $30,000 per year. Now, the average starting salary has increased pretty dramatically in the last 24 years. It's gone from $27,280, and this is adjusted for inflation. This represents 2012 dollars. It's gone from $27,280 all the way to $35,000. Now, one might say, how come this happened? Is it because IT departments are benevolent or because companies have become more empathetic towards service desk employees and just decided to pay them more? And the answer is no. What has happened here is that service desks recognize that when you pay a little bit more for level 1 agent or technician, you're likely to get someone who's more experienced, has better education, and a better skill set. And if you're trying to drive your FCR up, that is, increase your first contact resolution rate and increase your first level resolution rate, it helps to have experienced people working on the front lines of your service desk. And that's the primary driver behind this increase in salaries. The ironic thing is that as these salaries have gone up, one would think, oh, gee, you know, that's not good. Costs are going up. Well, the reality is, in many cases, the actual total cost of ownership for support has gone down. And again, I'm going to show you some evidence of that momentarily. But look at what this increase in salary has done, at least is partially responsible for, an increase in first contact resolution rate and an increase in first level resolution rate. So what's going on here is, again, this idea that, well, maybe support is more important than just log, dispatch, bag, and tag. Maybe we can do something by increasing and maximizing our FCR and our first level resolution rate. And in order to maximize those numbers, we might have to pay a little bit more to get a more experienced, better educated, more qualified person working on the front lines. Now, in 1988, it cost an average of $100 a year, just under $100 to support an end user. Last year, that number was over $500. The reason is that there are more contacts per user per month, and the average cost per contact has gone up. Now, if you multiply these numbers out, you don't get to 502 because we take here are averages, and when you multiply averages, you don't get the sum of those averages. So the math here might look a little bit fishy, but the reality is that today, 24 years later, it costs 5 times more to support an end user than it did in 1988. So naturally, if you're spending those kinds of resources, you want to do everything you can to drive customer satisfaction through FCR and to minimize TCO by maximizing your level 1 resolution rates. So when we talk about what's going on in the industry, there's a number of mega trends. One of them is this increased awareness and understanding of total cost of ownership. This idea that the help desk is evolving away from its historic role as a pure support activity, and it's evolving into a much more strategic role in the enterprise. A strategic role that has the ability to drive customer satisfaction, not just for support, but for all of IT. a strategic role that has the ability to return productive hours to end users, and a strategic role that has the ability to reduce total cost of ownership. And then there is this knowledge that the service desk is the primary driver of end user opinions, once again, not just of support, but of all of information technology. Now, behind these megatrends, there's a number of resultant megatrends, if you will. There's this increased emphasis on FCR and first-level resolution rate, the strategic application of key performance indicators. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that KPIs are no longer used to track and trend the performance of the service desk. They are used to also diagnose performance gaps, that is, strengths and weaknesses, develop action plans based upon that diagnosis, and then act on that insight. What a novel concept. So KPIs aren't just there to put pretty graphs on the wall. KPIs are there to be used diagnostically and prescriptively, and ultimately they're meant to be acted upon. If there's anything that distinguishes a world-class support desk, it's that they have a bias towards action. They act on the insights that they gain from their key performance indicators. We see greater investments now in agent development, not just in starting salaries, but also in the resources that are put into career pathing and coaching and training. We see new models emerging for measuring help desk value. The primary model is one of, what do you return in terms of economic value to the enterprise by making users more productive? There's a renewed emphasis on internal marketing, that is managing your message internally, and then the increased starting salaries for agents, which we talked about. We talked about why that is. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to use the words world-class and best-in-class a number of times, so it only makes sense to define what we're talking about when we use that terminology. There's 4 components of our definition. The first one has to do with quality. And on average, a world-class help desk is going to have high levels of customer satisfaction. They're going to have customer satisfaction well above the industry average. But that alone isn't good enough. You also have to have costs that are below the industry average. So we look for cost per contact being below industry average, and we look for low TCO as evidenced by a high first-level resolution rate. The help desk follows industry best practices, and the good news is those best practices are really pretty well documented at this point. In fact, what you're seeing over the next 70 or 80 minutes here is a condensation of our 2-day seminar on industry best practices. So those best practices are pretty well understood, pretty well documented. You don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do this through trial and error. You can build upon the industry-proven best practices. Service desks that do follow the industry best practices, that is the third criteria for being considered world-class. And then finally, and most subjectively, every transaction adds value, meaning that the customer has a positive experience, and this in turn drives a positive view of IT overall. So we've got 4 components of our world-class definition. We've got high quality as measured by customer satisfaction. We've got low cost as measured by cost per contact and first-level resolution rate. We'd like to see that the service desk follows industry best practices, which again are relatively well documented at this point, and every transaction adds value. But when the user comes away from the transaction, regardless of how stressful that transaction might have been, they feel good about the quality of support that they have received. So that brings us to our first polling question for the day. Let me go ahead and open that polling question. And the polling question is this: based upon the definition that I've just given you, do you consider your help desk to be world-class? Do you consider your help desk to be world-class? Remember, there's 4 components to that definition: cost below average, customer satisfaction above average, you follow industry best practices, and every transaction adds value. Do you consider your help desk to be world-class? Okay. Like everybody to weigh in on this, we're almost at 80%. We typically like to get 85 or 90% to weigh in on these surveys. So yes, no, we're not applicable. If you're not associated with the service desk, you're going to vote NA. So let me go ahead and close that poll down and then share the results with you. And here's what it says. 40% of you believe, based on the definition I've just provided, are in fact world-class. Another 53% say no, and then there's 8% that not applicable, you're not affiliated with a service desk, and this is a fairly typical result. We usually get about 50% saying that no, we're not there yet, another 40% saying that yes, we think we're there. For those that aren't there yet, first of all, thank you for your candor. But let me also suggest that achieving world-class performance, that is getting there, is really not that difficult. It doesn't have to take years and years, not even months and months in many cases. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. If you understand what it means to be world-class and you follow the industry's best practices, you can get there fairly quickly. So any performance gaps, anything standing between you and world-class levels of performance can be overcome relatively easily. And I want to encourage those of you that were honest enough to say that, no, we're not yet world-class, to keep at it, because it really doesn't take that much time, doesn't cost that money to achieve world-class levels of performance. So thanks for participating in that survey. I'm going to go ahead and close that down. We're going to continue on with our webcast now. And at this point, I'm going to introduce our model for industry best practices. It's a four-part model that addresses service desk strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and stakeholder communication. Now, these four components are all arrayed around a central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. We believe that customer satisfaction is a losing proposition. If all you're doing is satisfying your customers, you really are not creating loyalty with your customers. You're really not adding value on every transaction. So we hold world-class service desk to a higher standard. Customer satisfaction is not good enough. Customer enthusiasm, customer delight, if you want to call it that, is what you're after. Now, these four pieces of the model are relatively straightforward. There's nothing all that mysterious about the model. It represents what we see in the industry, as I mentioned earlier. They are synergistic and self-reinforcing, which means that every component of the model builds upon and feeds upon the other components of the model. The good news is that you don't have to be excellent in any of these four areas to be world-class. You just have to be above average in each of these four areas to be world-class, and synergy takes care of the rest. But if you're outstanding, for example, in strategy and performance measurement and human resource management, but you're weak in the marketing area, you're not going to be world-class. Weakness in any area cannot be made up for by strength in any of the other areas. So if you're not managing your internal message well, you're not managing expectations well, I don't care how strong your strategy is, how good you are at performance measurement and management, how strong you are at human resource management, you're simply not going to be achieving world-class levels of service and support. So you at least need above average performance in each of these four areas. We're going to begin our discussion by talking about IT support strategy. In short, it involves focusing on end-user productivity. This is how you add value in the organization, is that you return productivity to end users, and you're aware of total cost of ownership and how to maximize total cost of ownership. Minimize total cost of ownership. Slip a tongue there. Apologize. What we've observed in the industry is that help desks evolve through typically three stages. Newer help desks and help desks that have not evolved very far tend to operate in the support stage. They're very chaotic and reactive. Call volume oftentimes continuously increases at this stage, and customer satisfaction tends to be the goal in one of these newer or less mature help desks. At some point, most help desks begin to realize that there's got to be a better way to do things, and they begin making investments in training and tools and technology. They might establish a knowledge base, and oftentimes they get a handle on the call volume, and it starts to level off. But those that are the most successful in this evolution become strategic support centers, and the primary purpose of a strategic stage help desk is to make end users more productive and to drive a positive view of IT, and I'm going to show you how they do that. They're very proactive in the sense that they anticipate problems and they take action to prevent their occurrence. Things like root cause analysis, for example. As I mentioned, they're very proactive. Oftentimes, users are given tools to solve their own problems. It might be a user-enabled password reset, or it might be a user portal where a user can go to look up a solution to a problem. But at this stage, problem complexity does increase, and the reason is that you're eliminating the easy stuff through things like root cause analysis and giving the customer their own tools to solve the easier problems. So problem complexity does increase, handle time goes up, and cost per contact goes up. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Goal here is customer enthusiasm and the creation of value, not customer satisfaction, customer enthusiasm. You want loyal customers that propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals, want to come back and do business with you, and you're creating value. I'm going to show you how world-class support desks create value. But before I do that, let me explain what we've observed in the industry in terms of where the support industry tends to be. Still, nearly 2/3 or 61% operate in this chaotic reactive support stage. Another nearly 1/3, 31%, are in this transitional or growth stage. They are making those investments that are needed to become more strategic. And only 8%, unfortunately, operate truly strategically, where they are adding value on every transaction. They are preventive, they are proactive, and their goal and what they realize is, in fact, customer enthusiasm and value creation. Now, as I get into the 3 sources of leverage that you need to exploit as a strategic support organization, it's helpful to understand that there is a paradox here when it comes to IT support. If you look across North America at IT budgets, I don't care if your budget's $10 million a year or $10 billion a year, on average in North America last year, only about 4% of IT budgets were spent on end user support. That includes the service desk and desktop support. The other 96% was spent on things like application development and maintenance, network operations, mainframe and mid-range computing, desktop computing, and services like disaster recovery. So less than 5% of IT spending is devoted to support. Unfortunately, this causes many, including most CIOs, to assume that there's really very little upside opportunity in IT support, and the result is that many support organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing cost. Now, minimizing cost is fine, but if you do so at the expense of the user, if you do so at the expense of customer satisfaction and first contact and first level resolution rates, you're not managing value very well. The secret is that the most effective support strategies focus on not minimizing cost, but on maximizing value. And here's how they do it. There are 3 sources of value that you can leverage to your advantage. The first one has to do with your ability to minimize total cost of support. Last year in North America, the average cost of resolution at level 1 was $22 per ticket. This is a fully loaded cost. It includes all the agent salaries and benefits, plus the salaries and benefits of the indirect personnel, like team leads and supervisors, workforce schedulers, trainers, and QA/QC type people. It also includes facilities expense. It includes your desktop technology, your software licensing fees. It includes your travel, your training, your office supplies. This is all the expense divided by all contact volume. Last year, $22. For tickets resolved by desktop support, the cost was $62 on top of the $22. So these costs are additive. If a ticket comes to service desk and they log it and dispatch it to desktop support, you're adding $62 on top of this average $22. If a thing gets pushed to a different level within IT, say an application group, a NOC, for example, add another $85 on average on top of that. Somebody's got to jump in a car and drive someplace to resolve the issue, add on average another $200 on top of that. And when you get the vendor involved, on average, you're going to add another $500 on top of that. So you can see the value here of first level resolution rate. You've probably heard the expression in this industry, get it done at level 1. Now that's not just a catchphrase. That really has meaning, and you can see it here, because if you can get something done at level 1, you can do it for a much lower cost than if you have to send the ticket to desktop support or level 3, a different level within IT, field support, or vendor support. So world-class support organizations make investments in training and tools and technology and processes that enable them to maximize this level 1 resolution rate, and that is how you minimize total cost of ownership. That is a significant source of value add for most organizations when you stop to think about the fact that 22% of all tickets in North America last year resolved by desktop support could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Think about that. 22% of these $62 tickets could have and should have been resolved for $22 instead of $62 plus $22. There's a significant opportunity here for most organizations. It's low-hanging fruit. Service desks that really want to add value get serious about maximizing their level 1 resolution rate, which in turn minimizes their total cost of ownership. So I'm going to open up our second polling question of the day, and as you can imagine, it has to do with first level resolution rate. And the question is this: do you track first level resolution rate in your help desk? Keep in mind, we're not talking about first contact resolution. We're talking about first level resolution. If you have 1,000 incidents come in, what percentage of those get resolved at level 1? Not necessarily on first contact, but at level 1. Okay, we've got 70% of you having voted so far. I'd like to get that number up to about 85 or 90%. So if you haven't weighed in on this poll, please do so. Do you track first level resolution on your help desk? Give you another few seconds to vote here if you haven't so far, and let me share those results with you. Okay, 3/4 of you do track first level resolution, another 17% do not, and then 8% are NA. That 8% is the same as we saw last time, so roughly 8% of the audience today is not affiliated with a support organization or a service desk. Now, this is a pretty good result. 3 years ago, when we started asking this question, it was almost reversed. 75% said no, and 20% or 17% said yes. The fact that so many of you are tracking first level resolution rate is an indication that the message has gotten through. The message that first level resolution rate is an important metric, that maximizing that number is the key to minimizing total cost of ownership. So for all of you tracking that metric, kudos to you. For those of you who are not tracking the metric, I would encourage you to begin tracking first level resolution rate. It is the key to minimizing total cost of ownership. So let's move on now and look at the second key source of value that is exploited by strategic support organizations, and that is the ability to drive end user productivity. Now this slide, hopefully you're all seeing slide number 19, is a little bit complicated. So let me kind of explain in lay terms what we did here. Last year, MetricNet did a survey. There were there were 60 organizations that participated in that survey. They were large cap companies, that is Fortune 500 or Global 2000 type organizations. And we looked at their service desks and their desktop support organizations, and we looked at a number of metrics like customer satisfaction for the service desk and FCR for the service desk and mean time to resolve for the service desk. We looked at the same set of metrics for desktop support, and then we grouped those 60 support organizations into quartiles. There was the top quartile, best performers, second, third, and fourth quartiles, the weakest performers. Now here's what our research showed. Every organization has knowledge workers, and in fact most workers in North America now are in fact knowledge workers. They have one or more computing devices that they use to get their jobs done. They might have a smartphone, they might have a printer, they might have a desktop computer, they might have a laptop computer, and even other devices. They might have a tablet computer, for example. And with BYOD, bring your own device, becoming more pervasive, the number of devices that the average user has continues to grow. What we found was that various IT outages, VPN connectivity issues, software bugs, hardware breakdowns, we found that these IT incidents cause a loss of about 33 productive hours per knowledge worker per year. So if you look across North America at all the knowledge workers, the average knowledge worker loses about 33 hours of productivity a year due to various IT system outages, software glitches, and the like. However, in the group that we studied, where we broke down the support into 4 quadrants, 4 quartiles, we found that for those that were providing support, that is top quartile support organizations, the average productive hours lost per employee per year was about 17 hours. They still lose some time because of, say, hardware failures, VPN connectivity issues, stolen laptop, things like that. But it was much less than the average. Again, the average was about 33 hours per year. If they were in the second quartile, a knowledge worker lost on average about 26 hours of productivity per year. A third quartile support organization, knowledge workers in those organizations, lost about 37 productive hours per year. And if they were in the fourth quartile, the knowledge workers in those companies lost about 47 productive hours per year. So what you're seeing on the chart up here is the distribution of data points for the first, second, third, and fourth quartile. On the left-hand axis here, we've got the productive hours lost per employee per year. You can see that for the top quartile support organizations, the productive hours lost are significantly less than the productive hours lost for the fourth quartile performing support organizations. In fact, the difference between top and bottom quartile is about 30 hours per year. That is stunning. That is huge. Let's say you've got 10,000 people in your organization. 30 productive hours per year times 10,000 hours, it's 300,000 productive hours per year that you can return to your end users. Let's say you only have 1,000 employees at your company. 30 hours saved per year times 1,000 hours, that's 30,000 hours per year. That's the equivalent of 15 FTEs. Maybe you've only got 100 people in your company or 10 people in your company. The message is still the same. A top-performing support organization returns productivity to end users, and that is one of the primary sources of value that you can expect as a strategic support organization. You make your end users more productive. You make an economic contribution to the enterprise. Lastly, and this is a big one, we surveyed organizations a couple of years ago, more than 1,000 of them, and we asked end users in these organizations what it was that drove their customer satisfaction with IT. Not customer satisfaction with support, but customer satisfaction with IT. It was a big multiple choice question, but only one question. Big multiple choice because we gave them nearly 30 choices, which is why when you add these up, it adds up to more than 100%. We told them to pick their top 3 choices. The number one choice on the question, what drives your view of IT? The number one choice is the service desk. The number 2 choice, 47%, said desktop support. Now this is stunning. This is, if I'm a CIO or a Chief Technology Officer, my marching orders are very clear if I see something like this. Because what this says is that the vast majority of end user opinion, not just about support, but of all of information technology, is the result of interactions they have with the service desk and desktop support. Now that makes sense because the vast majority of users don't go to the NOC, they don't go to the data center, they don't hang out with applications people. Their interactions with support, the contact with support, is largely going to be through the service desk and or desktop support. So naturally, any opinion that they form about the competency of IT, any level of satisfaction that they have with IT is most likely going to be driven largely by the service desk and desktop support. 84% cited the service desk as a very important factor in their overall satisfaction with corporate IT, and 47% cited desktop support as a very important factor in their overall satisfaction with corporate IT. So the paradox is this. Corporate IT departments are spending less than 5% of their budgets on support, yet support has the ability to dramatically reduce the cost of IT by minimizing total cost of ownership. Support has the ability to drive productive hours back to the end users within the enterprise. And customer satisfaction with all of IT is largely a function of the quality of service that is delivered by the service desk and by desktop support. Talk about leverage. Less than 5% of your resources are spent here, yet you have the ability to drive down costs in support, you have the ability to return productive hours to end users, and you have the ability to drive a positive view of IT overall. Strategic support organizations understand this, and they take advantage of it. So let's move on to the second component of our best practices model, performance measurement and management. I'm going to start this section by showing you 25 different key performance indicators. There's a lot of KPIs on this page, but I don't want you to be led to believe that this is an exhaustive list. In fact, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of key performance indicators that I've seen in this industry. The 25 that I've shown on this page are the most common. These are the ones that we see most often. I've broken them down into 6 categories. There are cost metrics, there are quality metrics, productivity metrics that look at how productive your agents are. We have agent metrics around things like absenteeism and training hours and average time on job and job satisfaction. We've got service level and contact handling metrics such as handle time, self-serve completion rate, percent escalated, level 1 resolvable. I alluded to that earlier. How many tickets are escalated that could have and should have been resolved at level 1? Well, this is a big, ugly list, and we need to do something about it because it costs a lot of money. It creates a lot of bureaucracy to track all these KPIs. So I've got a solution to the problem, which I'll get to momentarily. We've all heard this expression, if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. You've also probably heard what gets measured gets treasured. There are variations on this theme, but there is a lot more to the story. Too many support organizations track a lot of data. They just love gathering data because it's relatively easy to gather data. Unfortunately, they don't do much with it. They don't really spend much time analyzing it. And as a result, they don't gain much insight from the data. And if you don't have much insight from your data, chances are you're not going to act on it. Now, this is a serious problem, but it represents a dilemma in the industry. The dilemma is this. The historical approach to managing key performance indicators is this. let's measure everything under the sun, and then we'll poke around a little bit, see what it means if we can. We might come up with some action plan based on that, but we don't expect a whole lot to happen because we don't have the confidence of our analysis since we didn't really do an analysis. The problem with that approach is that the value increases as you move up the pyramid. So what we've seen with those strategic support organizations is that they turn the pyramid upside down. They take a holistic approach and they say, you know what, the measurement piece by itself isn't all that important. We're going to measure a handful of things and we're going to do it well, but we're not going to track these 25 metrics. That's insane. Way too much data. What we're going to do is cut way back on what we measure, but we're going to spend a lot of time evaluating that data. And we're going to take that analysis and develop action plans. And then we're going to do something with it. Remember I talked about earlier the bias towards action which characterizes world-class support organizations? This is that in action. Fewer measurements, more analysis, more action planning, but above all, action. A willingness and ability to act on the insight that you gain from your key performance indicators. So we go back to this big ugly list of KPIs. These are not bad key performance indicators. It's just too much. It's too costly in terms of dollars, resources, time, headcount, and everything to track all this. So I'm going to submit to you that there's a much better way to do this. When it comes to key performance indicators, less really is more. The 7 that I've shown here on page 27 are the metrics that really matter. Starting with cost per contact and customer satisfaction, you always need a cost metric, you always need a quality metric. These are what we call the foundation metrics because everything you do in your support organization boils down to one of two things. You're either trying to contain costs or you're trying to drive a higher quality customer experience, which will show up as higher levels of customer satisfaction. Now, once you understand this concept, it greatly simplifies your job, whether you're an agent, a supervisor, a team lead, a manager, or even a CIO or a chief technology officer. If you look at support through the lens of cost and customer satisfaction, that will help drive and clarify all of the decisions that need to be made because everything you do boils down to one of these two things. You're either trying to manage the customer experience or you're trying to maintain costs or minimize costs. So any decision viewed through the prism of does it reduce cost in the long run or contain cost at least, does it improve the quality of the customer interaction, customer satisfaction in the long run? If it doesn't do one or both of those things, it isn't worth doing. Simple as that. This goes for training, new hires, a new piece of technology. It doesn't matter. Every decision can and should be viewed through the lens of, in the long run, does it contain costs, help contain costs, and does it help drive a higher quality customer experience? If the answer to one or both of those is yes, it's probably worth doing. If the answer to both of those is no, just don't do it. It's as simple as that. Now, if I'm doing a benchmark and I find that the cost per contact of an organization is high, I can't just go out there and tweak cost. I can, however, tweak underlying drivers of cost, one of the big ones being agent productivity or agent utilization, as measured by phone and ear time. I will define this metric a little bit later in more detail in this presentation. But agent utilization is a big driver of cost per contact because this is a labor-intensive function. 2/3 of the cost of a support organization are tied up in the labor. That's not just agent salaries and benefits, it's also salaries and benefits for any contractors, plus the indirect personnel like the supervisors, the team leads, the workforce schedulers, and the QA, QC people. But agent salaries and benefits, on average, in North America, make up about 50% of your cost structure. So any serious effort to contain cost has to look at agent productivity. Primary metric there that you're going to want to look at is agent utilization. The big driver of customer satisfaction, I've mentioned this several times already, is FCR, first contact resolution rate, drives customer satisfaction. So this is the underlying driver of customer satisfaction. If I'm doing a benchmark or an assessment and I find that customer satisfaction is not where it needs to be, typically the culprit is this. FCR is not as high as it should be. How do you improve first contact resolution rate? Well, you established a goal, first of all, for FCR. Secondly, you engage in training specifically designed to increase the FCR. Thirdly, you have tools at your disposal like knowledge management tools and remote diagnostic tools that enable you to proxy into a user's device and solve things remotely. There's a lot of things you can do to increase that first contact resolution rate and hence increase your customer satisfaction. The TCL measure we look at is first level resolution rate, FLR. We look at agent satisfaction. A lot of people are a little bit mystified by this. Why would we care that much about agent satisfaction other than the fact that it's a nice thing to do? Well, the reality is agent job satisfaction is a proxy for agent morale. And one of the perennial problems in this industry is low agent morale, low technician morale. And there's a myth or a belief in this business that, well, agent job satisfaction just happens. It's either good or it's not good. Agent morale is either good or it's bad. That's not true at all. It turns out that you can control agent job satisfaction and hence agent morale. Moreover, you want to manage it proactively because high levels of agent job satisfaction are correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. They are also correlated with low levels of absenteeism and turnover. Those are all good things. So why would you not want to manage agent job satisfaction proactively and get a higher number, thereby getting better customer satisfaction, lower agent turnover, lower agent absenteeism? This is a bellwether metric. It has a ripple effect across the organization and impacts just about every other metric in the service desk. So it is something that A, you should track, and B, you want to manage proactively. I'm going to show you how you manage that proactively in about 20 minutes here. Last is an aggregate metric, a balanced scorecard. And this is the first one we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the balanced scorecard first, and then we're going to go through these other metrics in a benchmarking case study. Now, before I get on to the balanced scorecard, an aggregate metric which kind of consolidates a number of metrics to create a single unified score for your service desk, let me point you to our website, MetricNet.com. We've got a number of white papers there that you can download. We've got one on the 7 most important KPIs for the service desk, which expands on this a little bit and provides more background on the 2 minutes that I've just given you here. Here's what a service desk scorecard looks like. Let me explain how you build one. You start by selecting the metrics that you want in your scorecard. What I've shown is just an example, but these represent the metrics I think are important: cost per contact, customer satisfaction, the 2 foundation metrics, the 2 drivers, agent utilization and first contact resolution rate, agent job satisfaction, you know why I think that one's important, and then average speed of answer. It's a service level metric that frankly doesn't really make that much difference, but since everybody in the world tracks either speed of answer or percent answered within 20 or 30 or 50 or 60 seconds, or call abandonment rate, I threw a service level metric in there to appease the service level type people, even though, as it turns out, as I will demonstrate a little bit later in this presentation, service levels don't really drive customer satisfaction. Nevertheless, the second step in this process is this. You put a weight on each one of these metrics according to its relative importance. Now, this is a judgment call, but this does represent my subjective belief as to which metrics are more important. We put 50% of the weight on cost and customer satisfaction. Those are the foundation metrics. I believe they should be overweighted. Utilization, which drives cost, gets a 15% weighting. FCR, which drives customer sat, gets a 15% weighting. And we put 10% each on job satisfaction and average speed of answer. Of course, these have to add to 100%. Then, for your particular benchmarking peer group, and I know that's a lot to take in, but if you're benchmarking against a comparable peer group, comparable to you, your service desk in terms of the scope and scale and complexity and geography of the services that you offer, in this particular example, for this benchmarking peer group, the highest cost per contact was over $55. The lowest was just over $9. The worst customer satisfaction was 63.7%. The best was 97.5%, and so on. So we've shown performance ranges here, worst case scenario, best case scenario. The company that created the scorecard, or that we created the scorecard for, then put their performance data in this column right here. And we're in a position now to calculate a score for each one of these 6 metrics. Here's how we do it. We look at the worst case in the peer group. We subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of this metric score. The denominator is the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. So what this number tells us is how far you are from the worst case to the best case. If you're doing really well, your number will be closer to 100%. If you're not doing so well, your number is going to be closer to the weak end. So the weaker end, or the worst case scenario. So when we look at this $21.83, that's pretty close to the best case scenario. So the score worked out to be 72.5%. You can run the numbers here and you'll come up with 72.5%. So you come up with a metric score between 0 and 100% for each one of the metrics. And when you multiply each score by the respective weighting, you come up with a balanced score for each metric. When you add all those together, you come up with a balanced scorecard for your service desk. Now, this service desk has a balanced score of almost 56%. Someone might look at this and say, gee, that's not a very good score. But the reality is, when we run this algorithm for hundreds of service desks worldwide, the average score is only about 50%. Those that are in the top quartile are at 62% and above. Second quartile is 50 to 62%. Third quartile performers are 38 to 50%. And if you're below 38%, you're going to be in the fourth quartile. So 55% is not a bad score. It is above average. It is at least in the second quartile. Now what this does for you is the following. There's a lot of moving parts in a service desk. There's a lot of KPIs. And oftentimes they move in different directions. Cost might be going one direction, customer satisfaction a different direction, agent satisfaction will be moving in yet a different direction. And month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out, sometimes it's difficult to answer the question, are we doing better this month than we were last month? Are we doing better this quarter than we were last quarter? The Balanced Scorecard answers that question for you. It's a very elegant solution. By tracking this metric, at least quarterly, but ideally monthly, if the number is going up, that's good. It says that your performance is improving. If the number is going down, it says just the opposite. And what we've done here is we've aggregated cost metrics and quality metrics and productivity metrics and call handling metrics, agent metrics, and service level metrics. We've normalized them. We've rolled them into a single all-inclusive indicator of performance that you can use to track and trend your overall performance. And that's exactly what this organization did on page 29. The blue bars here represent their monthly balance scores. You can see that over time, those numbers were going up. The purple background here represents the 12-month trailing average. And as you can see, 12-month trailing average was going up. So this is a very positive trend. And what enabled them to do this was to track their scorecard and update it monthly to see that the trend was moving in the right direction. A scorecard can also be used to help you benchmark against other support organizations. There's more than 50 represented on this chart on page 30. Here's our score, 55.6%. Remember, that's what we calculated over here, 55.6%. Here's the orange bar. The average for this peer group was about 50.3%. The high score was 86.5%. That's this one over here. Low score was 13.8%. That's this one over here. So the value and the beauty of the scorecard is that it gives you a single overall grade on your performance that you can use to track and trend your performance and that you can use to compare to other service desks, benchmark against other service desks to determine how well you're performing in the industry. Now the remaining 6 metrics, remember there's cost per contact, customer satisfaction, and 3 others. We're going to use a benchmarking case study to discuss those metrics. And keep in mind, we're still in the second part of our best practices model. Don't be too alarmed by the time. The final 2 sections of the model do go fairly quickly. But it makes sense to define benchmarking before we do a case study on benchmarking. So fundamentally, most of you probably know this already. Benchmarking involves comparing your service desk or help desk performance to a comparable peer group. Now, comparable peer group is an important phrase. Because if you're doing SAP support and your average handle time is 15 minutes per contact, you're not going to want to compare yourself against a service desk that does Microsoft Office support and has a handle time of 5 or 6 minutes. That's not a fair comparison. So it's critically important when you select a benchmarking peer group to look for comparability in scope of service offered, complexity of the support as measured by handle time, the geography, scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Scale meaning roughly the same number of contacts per month because there is a scale effect in this business. But once you get a peer group that's comparable to you, you compare yourself along the metrics that we've been talking about, cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first contact resolution rate, and so on. But the more important piece is this, understanding when there is a performance gap. If there are organizations you're comparing against that have better performance, lower cost, higher customer satisfaction, higher first contact resolution rate, how do they do that? The beauty of benchmarking is this. You can build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve through trial and error, through blood, sweat, and tears. You don't have to improve incrementally. You can build upon the industry's proven best practices and leapfrog ahead of all the trials and tribulations associated with trial and error, incremental improvement, and improve your performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. That's the real beauty of benchmarking, is that you can bypass all the trial and error and achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time. We have a white paper on this. If you'd like to download it, it talks about how you would go about benchmarking your service desk. Once again, that's a free white paper. You can download it at our website. And that brings us to the final 2 polling questions of the day. Let me pull those polling questions up. And as you can imagine, these polling questions have to do with benchmarking. And the next polling question is this: have you benchmarked your help desk within the past year? Have you benchmarked your help desk within the past year? By the way, I'd just like to thank all of you while you're filling out this survey. Thanks for logging in today. Just a few shouts out here: Wanda Jeffries, Steve Solomon, Sheila Mayer, Scott McCulloch, Ron Brooks, Rochelle Smith, Nick Shario, Nancy Rafe, Michael Wall. Thank you all for joining our webcast today. Give you a few more minutes here to weigh in on our poll. We've got almost a 90% vote. Let me go ahead and close that and share the results with you. Okay, in the past year, if you benchmarked your help desk, 55% of you say no, 32% of you say yes. Okay, good. For the 32% of you who have benchmarked, kudos to you. Our data shows that there's a 1-to-1 correlation between service desks that benchmark and service desks that are, in fact, world-class. Now, some world-class service desks benchmark because they're world-class. In other words, they do it because they know it's best practice. There are others that are best in class because they benchmark. In other words, benchmarking is the driver that helped them become world-class, whereas there are others that are world-class and they maintain that through benchmarking. For those of you who have not benchmarked in the past year, I want to encourage you, and I'm suspecting that those of you who haven't benchmarked in the past year, the 55% who say, no, you haven't benchmarked in the last year, are roughly the same group or subset of viewers today that said that you were not yet world-class based on the definition I provided about a half hour ago. So for those that haven't done benchmarking within the past year, I want to encourage you, if you don't have plans to do so, think seriously about doing a benchmark for your help desk. I think you'll find that it's a relatively straightforward process. It doesn't cost a lot of money, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it can yield enormous benefits for an organization, and it does, in fact, allow you to leapfrog ahead of all the trial and error associated with incremental improvement and achieve world-class performance at, as I mentioned, a revolutionary pace. Now, there's a follow-on question, which is this: do you plan to benchmark your help desk in the future? And there's 5 possible answers here. Yes, in the next 90 days. Yes, in the next 6 months. Yes, in the next year. No, and then, of course, not applicable. So I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on that. Now, do a few more shouts out here. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us: Bob Ireland, Brian Illich, Chris LaRose, Curtis Moore, Deb McDaniel, Jamie Aliotti, John Young, Kathy Downham, Marie Pascal. Thank you so much for joining our webcast today. Okay, we've got almost 90% participation in this survey. Give you another couple of seconds here to weigh in if you would like to, and then I'll go ahead and close the survey out and share those results with you. And here's what we got. Within the next 90 days, 20% of those on the webcast, nearly 1,000 of you, are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Another 22%, roughly the same number, are planning to benchmark within the next 6 months. 28%, nearly a third of you are planning to benchmark within the next year. 12% of you don't have any plans, and then 19% of you answered not applicable. That's a pretty good number. So the majority of you, the vast majority of you, are planning to do a benchmark within the next year. So once again, let me just encourage you to act on those plans, to carry out those plans. I think you'll find that the investment time and effort required to do a credible benchmark, a valid benchmark, will pay off many times over in improved performance within your support organization, improved customer satisfaction within your support organization, and improved recognition within the enterprise. That was our last poll for the day, so I'm going to go ahead and close that down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion of key performance indicators. And specifically, what we're going to do now is go through a benchmarking case study to explain the other 6 KPIs that I introduced earlier. What I'm showing on page 35 are a number of KPIs associated with a benchmark that we did a while back. Here we've got our 6 categories of metrics. We've got our cost, productivity, service level, quality, agent, and call handling metrics. We've got the key performance indicators listed in the second column from the left. We've got actual benchmarking data in this column and in the 4 columns on the far right-hand side. Now, a quick caveat here, this is real data, but I want to caution you and warn you against benchmarking your own service desk against this one for the reasons I just mentioned. Chances are it's not going to be comparable in scope and scale and complexity and geography. And the single most important success factor in benchmarking is to make sure that you have a valid comparison group, that you have a valid benchmarking peer group that is comparable to you along those dimensions. Because if it's not comparable, the benchmark is not going to be credible. It's not going to have conclusions that make any sense. What is important to benchmark against a peer group that has been selected specifically to match your service desk along those 4 dimensions of scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Okay. That said, the first thing I always do when I conduct a benchmark is I look at the 2 foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. The cost per contact for this service desk, and again, this is fully loaded cost divided by all contacts, is $28.17. The peer group average was at around $23. Okay, that's not good, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker, okay? Sometimes it's okay if your costs are above average if in return for that, the users are getting a higher quality experience, better first contact resolution, better first level resolution rate, and so on and so forth. But our costs are high, and that's worrisome. Second thing we look at is customer satisfaction. At 63%, it's well below the peer group average of 79%. There are about 50 companies in this particular benchmark. Okay, so we've got 2 big issues here. At least according to the foundation metrics, which I explained are the most important metrics in a support organization, our costs are high, and our customer satisfaction is low. That's not good. We need to figure out what's going on here, and that provides the foil for the discussion we're going to have over the next 3 or 4 minutes about key performance indicators. Then I'm going to close the loop by showing this chart again and diagnosing exactly what is going on with the support organization. Before I change slides, though, let me just point you one more time to our website. If you want to know more about selecting a benchmarking peer group, we do have a white paper on our website that you can download. So let's look at our foundation metrics, cost per contact, customer satisfaction. As I've already explained, I can't impact these directly, but I do have control over the underlying drivers of those metrics, specifically agent utilization, which drives cost per contact, and first contact resolution rate, which drives customer satisfaction. Here's agent utilization versus cost per contact. We measure agent utilization by phone in ear time divided by total time at work, and you can see that as the number goes up, the cost per contact goes down. That's not a surprise. This is a labor-intensive function. Half your costs are tied up in your agent salaries and benefits. So naturally, as the utilization goes up, you would expect your cost per contact to go down. The slope here is about 1 to 2, meaning that every 2 percentage point increase in utilization results in a 1 percentage point or 1% decrease in cost per contact. The reason for that is that agent salaries and benefits, as I mentioned, represent about 50% of your total cost. So any improvement in agent utilization does result in a reduction in cost per contact. What about first contact resolution rate? Once again, we see the strong correlation and cause-effect relationship here. As FCR increases, so too does customer satisfaction. Here the relationship is roughly 1 to 1, meaning a 1 percentage point increase in FCR yields about a 1 percentage point increase in customer satisfaction. What about our service levels? Okay, service levels do have an impact on agent utilization. When you have very aggressive service levels, for example, a 10-second ASA and a 1% abandonment rate, that tends to drive agent utilization because you have to staff up to meet the aggressive service levels. That reduces agent utilization and in turn increases your cost per contact. So if we look at average speed of answer here on page 41, you can see that as the ASA goes down, the cost goes up. Why? Well, I just mentioned it, because you need more agents to be able to answer the phones quickly, and that drives up your cost per contact. Likewise, the call abandonment rate. As you go to a lower and lower call abandonment rate, your cost per contact goes up. Now, many in the industry mistakenly believe that you need aggressive service levels to get a high customer satisfaction, but that's not true. Your service levels have very little impact on customer satisfaction, but they have a huge impact on agent utilization, on your cost per contact. As you can see, ASA drives cost per contact, as does call abandonment rate. But here's the real kicker. You don't get anything in terms of customer satisfaction by going to an aggressive service level. On this page, what I'm showing is average speed of answer as a percent of total handle time on the x-axis, and customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now, let's just say, for example, that you have a 10-minute handle time. If your ASA was 1 minute, that would be 10% of your total handle time. Let's say you have a 5-minute handle time. A 30-second ASA would be 10% of that handle time. If you have a 20-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 2 minutes. And what this chart is telling you is that as long as your speed of answer is less than 10% of your handle time, you're not going to see any improvement in your customer satisfaction. However, if you let your speed of answer increase much beyond that, you will see a drop-off in your customer satisfaction. The same phenomenon is true when it comes to call abandonment rate. At around 9 or 10%, you're going to see a drop-off in your customer satisfaction if your abandonment rate continues to increase. However, anything below about 8 or 9% doesn't improve your customer satisfaction. So here's the point. Why would you go for an aggressive service level if all it does is drive up your cost but doesn't do anything for your customer satisfaction? It just makes no sense. So what we believe at MetricNet is that your ASA ought to be somewhere in the range of 8% of your total handle time, and that your abandonment rate, as long as you're in the 6 to 8% range, you're going to be just fine. You're not going to get on the steep part of the curve where you're driving up your costs, and you're not going to be on the steep part of the service level curve where you see a reduction in your customer satisfaction. You're hitting the sweet spot here at right around or a little bit below 10%, where you're not increasing your costs, but you're also not sacrificing customer satisfaction. This is the mythology in the industry, is that you need a quick speed of answer and a low abandonment rate to drive customer satisfaction, but as I've just demonstrated with this data, blue diamonds are data points, red line is a regression. In some cases, you're going to see linear regressions. In other cases, you're going to see exponential regressions. That is not true. So once again, keep your ASA somewhere around 8 to 10% of your handle time, keep your abandonment rate somewhere in the range of 6 to 8%, and you're going to be doing just fine on your service levels. What about training hours and the impact they have on FCR? Well, if we look at new agent training hours, you can see, once again, blue diamonds are data points, red line is linear regression. As the new agent training hours increase, so too does FCR, and we know that's good because that drives customer satisfaction. On an annual basis, how much additional training do agents get? That is, once they're up to speed, they've been on the job for a while. Blue diamonds data points, red line linear regression, as the number of annual agent training hours increases, so too does the FCR. Look at all these blue diamonds here on the y-axis. These are support organizations that don't offer any additional training to their agents once they're up to speed and have gone through the initial training. So training is not just motherhood and apple pie. Training can drive and improve your FCR, and FCR drives and improves your customer satisfaction. So hopefully you're catching the drift here, which is that these KPIs are all connected, they're all correlated, there's cause-effect relationships associated with them, and if you understand those cause-effect relationships, you're in a powerful position to pull the levers you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. Okay, now here's agent satisfaction. Remember, that's a metric. By the way, the red metrics are the ones that were on the short list, the ones we really care about, like cost per contact, agent utilization, customer satisfaction, FCR, agent satisfaction. Let's look at agent satisfaction. Here we see the correlation between agent satisfaction and customer satisfaction. This isn't just an industry myth. As agent satisfaction goes up, so too does customer satisfaction go up. As agent satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Why would you care about turnover? Because it's costly. In this industry, every time you have to replace an agent, the cost is about $10,000. That's the cost of finding a person, screening a person, testing a person, doing a background check, training a person, and then having them come up to speed on the job, about $10,000. So turnover is not a good thing. You want to try and minimize turnover. Unfortunately, it is a high turnover industry. On average, in North America last year, the turnover was about 40%. But agent satisfaction levels, if managed well, can help to minimize the turnover you see. What about training hours and the impact that has on agent satisfaction? As training hours go up, so too does agent satisfaction. So training hours do a lot for you. It can drive agent satisfaction, it can drive FCR, but indirectly those training hours have an impact on your customer satisfaction. So let's go through this build again. We start with our foundation metrics of cost per contact and customer satisfaction, which are driven respectively by agent utilization and first contact resolution rate. Those are driven by a third order, a tertiary set of metrics, which are in turn driven by agent satisfaction. What drives agent satisfaction? Three things: the amount and quality of coaching, whether or not they have a formal career path, and the amount and quality of training that they receive. I mentioned very early in this presentation that agent satisfaction doesn't just happen. Agent satisfaction can be managed. You can be proactive. And if you have the appropriate level of coaching, if you do have a bona fide documented career path that an agent can take advantage of, and if they are trained properly, you're going to be able to manage that agent job satisfaction. And I'll go further and say that the single most important job of a support manager isn't maintaining the service levels. It isn't maintaining customer satisfaction. It's not even maintaining the cost. It's maintaining the morale of the agents in the organization. Because if you do that, almost everything else takes care of itself. That's how far-reaching the effective agent job satisfaction is. If you manage the agent job satisfaction well, most everything else is going to take care of itself. I've got a bit more data I'm going to share with you on agent job satisfaction in the next module of this best practices model. But before I get to that, let's get back to our benchmarking data. Remember, our cost was high, not good. Customer satisfaction, low, not good. We need to diagnose what's going on here. Remember the big driver of cost, agent utilization, phone and ear time. For this organization, it was 46.7%. The peer group was at 53%. There's our first smoking gun. We've got low utilization. Remember what drives utilization? Service levels. Let's look at our service levels. Average speed of answer, 18 seconds compared to 45 seconds for the peer group. Abandonment rate, 2.9% compared to 8.1% for the peer group. When I asked this company, why do you have an 18-second speed of answer and a 3% abandonment rate, their answer was this. No fooling. Our CIO said to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and our abandonment rate under 3%. That's a classic case of an individual that doesn't understand that service levels do not drive customer satisfaction. First contact resolution rate drives customer satisfaction. Customers are willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call. They're willing to forgive you an occasional long speed of answer. What they are not very forgiving of is incompetence as measured by first contact resolution rate. That's where you place your bets, is on first contact resolution rate, not speed of answer, not call abandonment rate. So their service levels were way too aggressive. That drove down their utilization. That drove up their costs. Simple remedy. Let the ASA drift up to the industry, this peer group average, 45 seconds. Let your abandonment rate drift up to 6 or 7%. How do you do that? Well, you're going to have to attrit. That is, you just have too many bodies, which is why your costs are too high. Hey, your turnover is 30% a year. You should be able to attrit fairly quickly. With that, you just don't backfill as you lose agents. And within about 90 days, this organization had, in fact, adjusted their service levels to be more in line with this peer group average, and their cost per contact dropped to $21. Pretty straightforward diagnosis, pretty straightforward remedy. What about customer satisfaction? Not very good at 63%. The peer group's at 79%. What's the big driver? Remember, FCR. So let's look at the first contact resolution rate. They're 51.3%. The peer group is at 71.2%. Okay, that's an issue. Now we've got our second smoking gun. Low FCR leads to low customer satisfaction. Okay, well, what drives FCR? One of the big ones is training hours. So let's look at their training hours. New agents got 36 hours of training compared to 79 hours for the peer group. On an annual basis, they got 12 hours of training, which is 34 hours for the peer group. Simple remedy. Spend more time up front and annually on agent training, and focus specifically on how those agents can increase the first contact and the first level resolution rates. Once again, in a relatively short period of time, in this case about 180 days, they saw their FCR increase to nearly 80%, and their customer satisfaction went to nearly 85%. You see, if you understand how the KPIs are interconnected, how they drive each other, what the cause-effect relationships are, you're in a very powerful position to diagnose your benchmarking indicators, to understand what drives any performance gaps, and most importantly, to do something about closing the negative performance gaps. I'm going to take a few questions right now because there are quite a few of them that are queued up, and I want to answer a few questions now. I will be done with the webinar in about 20 minutes, so for those of you who can stay on until the end, I hope you do so. Any questions that I'm not able to answer right now, I will answer at the end of the webcast. I'll stay on long enough to answer any remaining questions. Okay. Question from Nick. Will the PowerPoint slides be available after the webinar? We provide it to you in a PDF document, and we send that to anybody who completes the survey. When you log out of the webcast, A survey will pop up from GoToWebinar. 2 questions on it. Takes less than 10 seconds to answer. Just answer those questions for us. We'll send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, from Kathy. Do MetricNet's benchmarking extend beyond the U.S. for comparison with peer groups? The short answer is yes, we do benchmarking all over the world in nearly 80 countries, but we don't compare one country to another. For example, we would not compare the U.S. to India. The wage rates are very, very different, and it wouldn't be a fair comparison. So we don't do intra-company, I'm not sure the inter or intra. We don't compare one country to another because the wage rates are too different. But within any given country, we do a lot of benchmarking. Okay, other questions? Relatively small number of questions so far that are queued up here. Okay, from Carlos. What about global service desks? Well, if you have a global service desk, that service desk is either going to be in one or multiple locations. So let's say you've got a global service desk, Carlos. You've got one location in the United States and one in Hungary and one in Costa Rica. You can benchmark Costa Rica against other Costa Rican service desks. You can benchmark Hungary against other Eastern European desks, and you can benchmark your U.S. desk against other U.S. desks. So if you are a global service desk or supporting a global customer base, you can still benchmark the service desk based upon the physical location of the agents. From Nick, how does the agent utilization metric get impacted in relation to agent to user count? The utilization and the ratio of agents to users, that there is no relationship between those two things. We have found in some organizations, and this, if you were on very early on in the presentation, we talked about how there's a certain number of contacts per end user per month. On average, last year it was almost 2 contacts per end user per month, but it varies dramatically from about 0.5 contacts per user per month in a energy utility like a gas and electric utility, all the way up to as many as 5 or 6 contacts per user per month in a financial services organization. So naturally, if your customers are calling 5 or 6 times a month, you're going to need more agents per end users than you would in the utility that only has half a call per user per month. So utilization has nothing to do with the ratio of agents to users. You need to divorce that in your mind. They don't have anything to do with each other. Utilization is about how many contacts an agent handles in a month, the length of those contacts, and the overall time they spend in pure customer service. We call it PI time, phone and ear time, but it has nothing to do with the relationship of agents to end users. And in fact, that ratio, agents to end users, is a bad metric. It doesn't tell you anything other than some industries require more agents than others because the end users generate more contacts than they do in certain other agents. Okay. Mary says, I will submit the survey, but is there a way to get the audio? Yes, we'll send you a link to the recorded webcast. Question here from Lark, typical first-level agent salary and differential for overnight for Midwestern region. That's a pretty specific question. I'd have to look it up, but I can answer it if you want to call me after this. From Gary, how much can be applied to B2B technical help desk support, i.e. supporting software products that have been sold to other companies? The same principles apply, Gary, whether you're doing business to consumer, business to business, or an internal service desk supporting internal users. The principles we've been going through are entirely applicable, whether it's B2C, B2B, internal support, or anything else. Nothing we've said is specific to business to consumer, business to business, or internal support. All the principles apply. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding your question, but the principles apply across all sorts of support organizations. Question from Jim. Do you find agent salary and benefits are a key driver of agent satisfaction, or is there a stronger correlation between career path and training? Jim, there is a weak correlation between compensation and agent job satisfaction. The stronger correlation, though, is with career pathing, training, and coaching. So if you're underpaying your agents, there will be a certain barrier to achieving high levels of agent job satisfaction. However, assuming that you're paying your agents at least at industry average levels for your geography, it does vary pretty dramatically, as I mentioned earlier, then the key drivers become career pathing, training, and coaching. But compensation by itself can't buy agent job satisfaction. It is a factor, but it is a relatively weak factor. Okay. There's a lot more questions now queued up. Thank you for your questions. I don't want to answer them right now because I want to get through the remainder of our webcast. I will, however, answer the remaining questions at the conclusion of the webcast for those that can stay on a little bit longer. Let's get to the human resource section of our best practices model. And what I'm going to do here on page 57 is introduce a little bit of a cheat sheet here where I've listed some human resource best practices. This is not a comprehensive listing. I want to emphasize that. This is not all of the HR best practices, but it does represent some of the more important human resource best practices around recruitment and training and career pathing and retention. What we've listed in the left-hand column is kind of a shorthand for the best practice. We've elaborated on it a little bit in the second column. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got a bunch of cells. Let me explain what these mean. In the upper right-hand corner, I've listed some key performance indicators: cost per call, customer satisfaction, utilization, FCR, call quality, handle time, turnover. Okay, the cell at the intersection of a best practice and an affected KPI is going to be colored white, light blue, or dark blue. If the cell is white, it means that the best practice has little or no impact on the KPI. So first call resolution rate really is not affected by the way you recruit. By contrast, the dark blue cell indicates a strong cause-effect relationship. FCR is strongly influenced by training, the quality and the amount of training. A light blue cell represents a weak cause-effect relationship. The handle time is a function of training, not a strong function of training, but it is a weak function of training. So here's how you interpret this. If you go off and do a benchmark for your service desk and you find that there's a gap, it might be in cost per contact or customer satisfaction or utilization or first contact resolution rate. You can look at a chart like this and it will help you understand what are the processes around human resource management that you might be able to engage in, improve, revise, or adopt in an effort to improve your performance relative to this KPI. Surprisingly enough, just putting a performance standard in place for any of these metrics oftentimes goes a long ways towards improving your performance relative to these metrics. So the way you would interpret this chart is as follows. Gee, I've got a gap in agent utilization. One way to improve agent utilization is to put a productivity standard in place for the agent, require that they handle a certain number of contacts per month. And I know that that's taboo in the industry, but the reality is agents need to be held accountable not just for the quality of service they offer, but also the volume of service that they offer. There's no escaping the fact that every agent ought to be held accountable not just for FCR and customer satisfaction, but also for handling a certain number of contacts per month. So there should be a productivity standard as well as a quality standard for every agent. Customer satisfaction is a strong function of training. It's a weaker function of coaching and feedback and having performance standards. So this, in general, is how you would interpret this chart. It relates some of the more important key performance indicators in the support organization with some of the more common best practices in human resource management. Now, I'm back to that build that I showed you earlier of the key performance indicators, and here I've sort of highlighted with a blue background that coaching, career pathing, and training are primary drivers of agent satisfaction. And per the question I answered a few moments ago, salary has an impact, but it doesn't rise to the same level as coaching, career pathing, and training. If you look at annual training hours, you can see the correlation between annual training hours and agent job satisfaction. If we look at data around organizations that have a career path, dark blue diamonds, organizations that don't have a career path, these fuchsia or hot pink diamonds, I guess they would be called, or squares, we see that when there is no career path, the average agent job satisfaction is 72.3%. When there is a bona fide documented career path, the average agent job satisfaction is almost 81%, these blue diamonds here. So here's the evidence that supports the career path conclusion that I gave you earlier. Now, a career path can be a vertical career path, meaning that you can go from agent 1 to agent 2 to supervisor to team lead to manager, for example, but not everybody can move up that pyramidal career path. There should also be a technical career path that enables agents to advance based upon their knowledge and their expertise within the industry as measured by customer satisfaction with their tickets as well as first contact and first level resolution rate with their tickets. Let's move on to marketing, the final component of our best practices model, all right around the central objective of customer enthusiasm. what I want to introduce to you on page 62 is that perception and reality are not one and the same thing. And I've shown a two-dimensional chart where I've got reality on the x-axis, what I call actual value produced by a support organization. And on the y-axis, I've got perceived value. This is what your customers think you're doing. Now, if actual value and perceived value were the same thing, you would end up somewhere on this diagonal line. If you're way down here in the lower left, let's say the value that you're delivering to the organization is not very good, and the perceived value is not very good, well, at least the perception and the reality are one and the same. You're on this diagonal line where the perceived value equals the actual value. Likewise, if you're delivering a high level of value and the perception is that you're delivering a high level of value, you're going to end up here, again, if the perception is fair, you're going to be on the diagonal, but you'll be way up here on the upper right. Now, if you're down here in the lower right, where the perceived value is less than the actual value, that's a danger zone. That's why it's red. If you're in the upper left, perceived value is greater than the actual value, that's green. It's nothing to be worried about, but the reality is this just doesn't happen. The reality is customer perceptions are always less than the actual value. So what we have is a common but dangerous position where you're down here in the lower right. You might be delivering good value, but the perception is not that you're delivering good value. The reason this is a dangerous position is because decisions are based on perception, not reality. And if the perception is that you're not doing very well, even though you may be doing extraordinarily well, decisions are going to be based on that incorrect perception. It might be a decision not to fund the service desk appropriately, not to add additional headcount, not to make a technology investment. It might be a decision to outsource, which, by the way, we're neither pro nor con on outsourcing, but the decision should be based upon a proper analysis. And if the perception is incorrect, sometimes outsourcing is done for the wrong reasons, sometimes insourcing is done for the wrong reasons. So this is a very dangerous position to be in, and the vast majority of support organizations are, in fact, down in this lower right quadrant where they're delivering good value, but the perception is not that they're delivering good value. So what we want to do is manage our brands a little bit more effectively. We want to close this perception gap and make sure that perception and reality are one and the same. So if you're down here where you're delivering good value, but the perception is that you're not delivering that good of value, we want to close this gap and get you up here to where perception and value are one and the same thing. Now, we developed a 5-part model. We actually have a half-day workshop on this. I'm going to boil it down to about 3 minutes for you. There's 5 W's. Who are the key stakeholder groups? You've got to define them. It's not just your end users. There are other critical stakeholder groups you need to be aware of. What are the key messages that you're going to communicate? When and how often do you communicate those? How do you reach those stakeholders? Through what channels? And then, why are we even doing this? There's a good punchline here that I hope you'll stay on for. But let me boil down our half-day workshop into a single slide on key success factors in image management. Let's talk first about timing. We're going to look at 3 dimensions. We're going to look at the timing. We're going to look at the messages. We're going to look at the channels you use to communicate. First of all, contact or communication needs to be frequent. At new employee orientation, new employees need to understand how they can reach IT support and what the help desk is all about. Whenever an individual logs in to a server or a network at your company, there ought to be a brief message. To reach the service desk, click here or call here, hours of operation, whatever it might be. When there's training going on, new orientation training, perhaps IT training, there should be a module on how to make the best use of IT support. During an incident itself, most support organizations don't do a very good job of managing expectations during the incident itself. And at scheduled sessions, for example, you might have a brown bag session, you might do webcasts like we're doing right now. Many of our clients do monthly webcasts to their end users, a little half hour at lunchtime once a month. Here's what the service desk does, here's how you can help us, call at these times, make sure you do these diagnostics before you call us, that sort of thing. So the thing to remember here is frequent contact is good. What about the messages? Well, hit them with multiple messages about what your services are, key initiatives you've got underway. Maybe you're adopting a password reset tool. Maybe you're doing root cause analysis. Let them know what your performance is, the good, bad, and the ugly. Provide them with the FAQs online that they can download, answer some of the more common questions, and let them know about some of the successes you've had. in customer satisfaction, in technology, in first contact, and first level resolution rate. And how do you communicate with them? Well, use all channels. So the theme here is ubiquity. Talk to them often. Give them multiple messages. Use every available channel. Login messages, quarterly newsletters, downloadable reference guides, asset tags that show the phone number for the service desk on it, surveying your customers and sharing the results of those surveys with them, and then user liaisons. These are representatives within different departments in the company, for example, in HR or finance or accounting, who agree to act as the eyes and ears of the end user within that department. And then you communicate with them on a periodic basis and say, okay, what's everybody in HR thinking about the quality of support? Or what's everybody in the field sales department thinking about the quality of support? So these liaisons agree to act as the go-between, if you will, the go-between between support and the end users within a particular part of the organization, and they can be an extremely valuable source of information going both ways. They can communicate to you what the users are thinking, and you can communicate back to the users any messages that you think are important for those users to get. So why are we doing all this? Well, we've heard the expression, expectations not set are expectations not met. Absent any information to the contrary, your customers will assume the worst. And it's your job to make sure that they don't assume the worst. So we need to be serious about proactively managing these expectations. More than a decade ago, a client of mine sent this comment to me. It reads, "Delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to?" Well, I've talked at length about this early on in the webcast. Customer satisfaction is a losing proposition. What you need is customer delight. You need customer enthusiasm. You want customers to be loyal to you. You want them to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals about you. And you want them to do business with you because they want to do business with you. It's a conscious choice to do business with you. Most importantly, this is why it matters. To go back to a slide I showed much earlier in this presentation, the perception of all of IT, the customer satisfaction for all of IT is largely a result of interactions those end users have with the service desk and desktop support. And for those of you that are on the front lines of support, I know it's easy to get bogged down in the minutia of service levels and customer complaints and the day-to-day firefighting that goes on, but I would ask you to take a step back from that ground level perspective and recognize that IT is the gateway, or the support, I should say, is the gateway to all of IT. And it's a great opportunity for you to influence what end users think about all of IT. You can use this opportunity wisely to shape a positive view, not just of support, but of all of information technology. And for CIOs and CTOs and other managers within IT, I hope this is a call to action and prompts not just the investments in tools and technology and headcount, but also investments in your time and energy that you devote to support. Because the reputation of your entire organization, and by proxy, your reputation, your personal reputation within the organization, is largely shaped by interactions that customers have at these support interfaces, the service desk and desktop support. So what I just communicated to the frontline support professionals applies even doubly to the managers. Use this opportunity wisely. It's low-hanging fruit. It has the potential to drive a positive view of all of IT, and by proxy, a positive view and high level of satisfaction with your leadership in the organization. So when it comes to marketing, managing the gap between perception and reality is pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't cost a lot of money, but it is critically important. The success of your help desk depends as much on your image as it does on your actual performance. Here's another piece of low-hanging fruit. You could be doing a great job, but if you're not recognized as doing a great job, if the perception is not that you're doing a great job, you're leaving money on the table. The benefits of effective image management include customer loyalty, positive word-of-mouth referrals, credibility, which leverages your ability to get things done. This is credibility not just for the support organization, but for the leadership of IT, which I mentioned a moment ago. It drives a positive image for IT overall and high levels of customer satisfaction. So let's summarize what we've learned here. We've looked at a four-part model that addresses strategy and three sources of leverage that you can take advantage of. We've looked at metrics, human resource management, and managing the message. When it comes to the first part of our model, focus on adding value through prevention and proactivity, understanding TCO by maximizing level 1 resolution rate, and recognize that value is created by returning productivity to end users and by driving a positive view of all of IT. When it comes to performance measurement, you only need a small number of KPIs. Remember, less is more, but you should have a balanced scorecard which gives you the overall performance score. You should benchmark at least once a year and understand the key cause-effect relationships with the key performance indicators. For human resource management, think holistically about those that work in the organization and invest appropriately in agent training and development and coaching. Have a formal career path, frequent coaching and feedback, and formal retention strategies to help reduce turnover, which is very costly to an organization. And when it comes to marketing, you can actively manage your brand, recognizing that perception and reality are not the same thing, but you can close that gap. The help desk, the service desk are drivers of IT perceptions, and you can communicate value, the value that you bring to the enterprise by returning productivity to the enterprise and by minimizing the total cost of ownership. The bottom line is that the help desk is now being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise, one that can reduce the overall cost of IT by driving down TCO for support, dramatically improve productivity of end users, and drive high levels of customer satisfaction for all of IT. Strategic help desks, those that are the most evolved, that add the most value to the enterprise, are well integrated into the value chain. They're not off on the side. They're not literally some support activity. They're fully integrated into the information technology value chain. They understand the economics of TCO, and they have active efforts to maximize FCR, which maximizes customer satisfaction, and FLR, which minimizes your total cost of ownership for support. They use performance metrics diagnostically and holistically. They benchmark at least once a year. They invest in training, coaching, and career pathing for their agents. They actively manage their internal messages. They make sure that that gap between perception and reality doesn't exist. It doesn't grow too big. And they aggressively promote and communicate their value. Now, there's 4 things that you can do coming out of this to get started. The first would be to just register for future MetricNet webcasts. I would also encourage you to take advantage of a free offer for a MetricNet help desk consultation session. We're going to reach out to each of you within the next 24 hours with an email, and we're going to ask you to set up time with MetricNet for a brief discussion. We want to get to know you. We want to know a little bit about your support organization, and we want to answer any questions you have about this webcast or any questions you might have about managing your support organization more effectively. If you want to reach out to us, please do so. You can call us in the United States at 703-992-8160, or you can send us an email at info@metricnet.com. We also encourage you to download our white papers. They're always free on our website, or go to zenosupport.com. It's a page on our website where you can download any of our best practices white papers related to IT support. And finally, for those who are serious about becoming world-class and want to get there quickly, our help desk benchmark is probably the quickest and easiest way to get there. This benchmark is built on MetricNet's worldwide database of help desk process and performance indicators, and it's the most comprehensive benchmark in the industry. It includes benchmarks of more than 25 KPIs, a balanced scorecard, a process maturity assessment, and a roadmap to achieve world-class performance that is specific and unique to your help desk. Now, help desk benchmark is just one of the ways in which we can assist you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webcast, we also do benchmarking for call centers, for desktop support, and for field service organization. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending this session. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast, because this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let me open up the Q&A session. I know we've got quite a number of questions that are queued up here, and I want to answer as many of those as I can. Okay. All right, let's see. Question from Carla. If the rating of ASA in the first week of the month results within a 79% when the target is 90%, how many chances exist to reach it? I can't answer that question, Carla. That depends on your organization. But I would also suggest that this level of focus on ASA is probably misguided because as you saw when I went through a discussion of the key performance indicators and the cause-effect relationships for those key performance indicators, ASA is not terribly important. So if the first week of the month you hit 79% of your goal and your target is 90%, I'm not sure that makes a difference. I'd much rather hear you ask about FCR and first level resolution rate, which do have a significant impact on customer satisfaction and cost per contact. But this emphasis on ASA is somewhat troubling, and it suggests to me that maybe the focus is in the wrong place on your service desk. Question from Jerry. How do you factor in email from a CRM solution like the ones calls to agent utilization? Well, that's relatively straightforward. There's a handle time associated with emails, and all you have to do is look at the handle time for email divided by the total time that the agent is at work. So when I use the term PI, phone in ear time, I wasn't literally saying the time that the phone is in their ear. It's also the time that they're working on emails. So we recognize that calls come in or contacts come in through a lot of different channels. They come in through email, voicemail, live voice. There can be web contacts, fax-ins, walk-ins. Essentially what utilization looks at for an agent is work time, and that could be phone in ear time, it could be time working on an email, time responding to faxes, but it looks at work time divided by their total time at work. In a typical month, the total time at work is about 9,600 minutes. Typical work time on emails, voicemails, live voice, web chats, and the like is around 5,000, 5,500 minutes on average. So the fact that contacts come in through different channels doesn't affect the agent utilization calculation. Okay, how do you convince, this is from Matt, how do you convince level 2, 3 organizations to drive resolution to the level 1 service desk? Well, if you're the level 1 service desk, in my opinion, it shouldn't be your job to convince them to drive resolution at level 1. It should be the job of the leadership of your organization, the CIO, the chief technology officers, and others in the organization to drive resolution at level 1. So typically level 2, level 3, especially level 3 are IT professionals. If they work in a data center, if they work in an applications group, generally they don't want to do the support stuff, and they're happy to let level 1 do it if possible. If there's some resistance here, and I'm sensing from your question that there might be, sometimes there's turf protection issues. Sometimes desktop support likes getting level 1 issues because they're, it's pretty easy to, resolve a level 1 issue when you go out to the side of the user and you do the troubleshooting right there. So in my opinion, level 1 needs to raise the level of awareness. If you believe that there's level 2 and 3 resolutions going on that you can and should be doing at level 1, you got to raise that level of awareness. But what you really need is a sponsor, in the organization, in a leadership position, who can say, hey, enough of this. Resolving at level 3 where it's, $100 a contact, or resolving at desktop support where it's $82 a contact. Let's get this done at level 1. So level 1 needs to raise the awareness, but you need leadership to really force the issue. Okay, from Cindy, can the KPI and analysis discussed be applied to a production support organization? So an organization receiving inquiries from end users about system applications. Some of those might be quickly resolved. Others may require ID intervention, would take much longer to resolve if not applicable. Are there any other KPIs? Yeah, absolutely, this is applicable. What you're talking about is complexity and handle time. And we recognize that as complexity increases, as handle time increases, some of those tickets get pushed to other levels of support. They get pushed to an application expert. They get pushed to a desktop support. They get pushed to a vendor in some cases. But there's nothing in here. None of these KPIs are obviated, or none of these KPIs are neutralized or canceled out when you're in an environment like the one that you're describing. So everything that we've discussed here today in terms of the key performance indicators, how they affect each other, which ones are important, absolutely applies in the environment that you're talking about. What I think you're alluding to is the fact that first contact resolution rate might be low in your environment, and that's okay. First level resolution rate might be low in your environment. That's okay. We understand that in some environments where your handle times get long and the complexity is high, a lot of those tickets do get escalated. They do get pushed out, and that impacts first contact and first level resolution rates. And that sort of underscores why it's critically important when you benchmark your performance to make sure that you're benchmarking against comparable organizations. If your FCR is 50% and your FLR is 60% and you're doing a great job, you don't want to be compared against a support desk that's supporting, Microsoft Office applications with a 90% FCR and a 95% FLR. It's not a fair comparison. But all the KPIs apply, all the principles that we discussed here apply, Cindy. But it is important if you're going to be benchmarking to make sure that you benchmark against a comparable peer group. Okay, from Omar, I have a WO of 16 analysts. How easy is it to reach an ASA of 90% within a range of 30 seconds? I'm not sure what WO means, but I assume it means you have a head count of 16 analysts. How easy is it to reach an ASA of 90%, 30 seconds? Again, I think the emphasis here is in the wrong place. It might be hard to reach that number. It might be easy to reach that number. If your handle times are short, it should be easy to reach that number. If your handle times are long, it's going to be very hard to reach that number. But ASA is not where the emphasis needs to be. Okay, from Matt, how do you apply these best practices to outsourcing partners that are an extension of the company? Well, you make sure your outsourcing partners, are aware of the best practices and you hold them accountable to these. One thing you can do to ensure that they are, delivering value and reporting effectively on their performance is to put in place a balanced scorecard like the one that I went through and have the outsourcer update that balanced scorecard monthly. That gives you a single score that you can discuss month in, month out. And if the trend is moving up, that's good. If the trend's moving down, that's not as good. So when it comes to applying the best practices to outsourcing partners, they need to be aware of what these are. They need to, support what you believe to be the best practices. And I think one way to do that is to, get this balanced scorecard in place and have them update it monthly. From Cindy, you mentioned productivity measures calculated by cost, fully loaded labor, average time to close an issue. Could it also be measured of number of available resources divided by average time to close? Okay, productivity measures. Productivity is not, let's see, fully loaded labor cost, average time to close. Could it also be measured by available resources over average time to close? Yeah, I mean, if you've got more available resources, the average time to close should go down. I'm not quite sure what you're driving at here, Cindy, but naturally, if you add headcount, the time to close or mean time to resolve, MTTR, should go down. But I would be worried about an organization that is adding resources so that they can reduce the MTTR. I mean, if the goal is to get the MTTR down and you add headcount to do that, let's say you go from 15 headcount to 20 headcount for the purpose of reducing the mean time to resolve, you're going to see your costs go up pretty dramatically. You're also going to see your utilization go down pretty dramatically. So I'm not sure the premise of your question is valid. Yes, the ratio of resources to average time to close is going to grow as you add resources and time to close goes down. But you're also going to see your costs go up a lot, and you're going to see your utilization go down. So I'm not quite sure what you're driving at here, but let me suggest that adding headcount to reduce your MTTR may not be the best strategy. From Ramiro, is the webcast recorded to view? Yes, it will be. We'll send you a link, Ramiro. From Marie, hello, do you have a roughly average phone in time in order to have a good agent utilization ratio when you are a service desk? Sorry. Your English is fine. Don't worry about that. But average, I think what you're talking about is average handle time. And Marie, the average handle time, or maybe you're talking about the time on phone, okay? Now, average handle time is all over the map. It ranges from about 2 minutes to an hour or more, depending on complexity of the tickets. In terms of time on the phone, to get a good utilization rate, an agent needs to be on the phone about 50 to 55% of the time that they are at work. I mentioned earlier that there's about 9,600 working minutes in a month. An agent should be on the phone about 5,000, 5,500 working minutes during that month to hit a reasonable utilization. Now, that doesn't mean they're goofing off 50% of the time. It means that the rest of that time is spent on things like administration, training. There's a certain amount of time where they're wearing a headset and waiting for a call to come in. They have team meetings. There's a lot of different activities that go on, as you know. But I would encourage you to download our white paper from our website, the 7 most important KPIs for the service desk. It explains how you calculate agent utilization in there. Okay, from Audel. The webinar is focused on help desk. I'm keen to know more about desktop support and what MetricNet does in that field. Audel, the best thing to do is to sign up for our next 2 webcasts. Both of those deal with desktop support. We've got one on best practices and desktop support and one on the KPIs for desktop support. So just go to our website, sign up for the next 2 webcasts. From Priscilla, as it pertains to customer satisfaction, is NPS the best method, Net Promoter Score? No, my personal belief is that customer satisfaction is still better than NPS. And part of the reason is that even though NPS has a fairly straightforward definition, you've got a scale of 1 to 10, and your 9s and 10s are your promoters, and your 7s and 8s are neutral, and anything under a 7 is a detractor. And essentially you take your promoters and you subtract your detractors, and you oftentimes end up with a score below 0. There's a couple of issues. One is that we found that Net Promoter Score is not measured the same way across the industry, and nor is customer satisfaction, but there's more uniformity in the way customer satisfaction is measured than in the way NPS is measured, and for that reason we like customer satisfaction better. We think it's a better method. The other thing is that NPS, and by the way, Net Promoter means would you recommend, would you promote our service to friends and family, that kind of thing. The NPS score tends to be demoralizing because an organization looks at their NPS and it's 10% or 30%. You don't get NPS scores that are in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You just don't. A lot of times they're negative. A lot of times they're down around 10, 20, 30%. It tends to be demoralizing. People want to know that their customer satisfaction is up around 80 or 90 or 95%. They don't want to know that their Net Promoter Score is 20%. So it's a little bit of a psychological issue, but the point is that, in my opinion, NPS, there's too much variability in the industry in terms of how that's done. And secondly, the actual measure of NPS tends to be a little bit of it tends to be demoralizing to organizations. Okay, Jerry, follow on to an earlier question. It looks like there's no handle time for email. Well, you might want to start tracking it. Usually, most organizations have an incident tracking system where when they're, they can log in, they can log out when they're tracking email. But to say there's no handle time for email, there is a handle time. You're just not tracking it. And email handle time should be tracked. An agent can go into email mode, and when they log out of email mode, if they've resolved 10 emails in 60 minutes, that's 6 minutes per email. Okay, you say it's not tracked in Salesforce.com, but there are other tools that allow you to track email time. Okay, from Nick, what framework is best to use in relation to process to achieve coming to these metrics? You don't need a particular process to come to these metrics. What we've discussed here today has nothing to do with IDLE. It has nothing to do with MOF or anything else. You don't have to follow any particular process to adopt these metrics. These metrics are valid regardless of whether or not you're doing IDLE, regardless of whether or not you're doing any other best practices or following any other framework or process. The metrics are the metrics and they're valid. So don't get too caught up in this idea of, is it IDLE compliant? It doesn't matter. The metrics, the way we presented them, and the principles around the metrics, less is more. Make sure you track cost per contact, for contact resolution rate, etc. Have a balanced scorecard. That's all valid regardless of whether or not you're doing IDLE or MOF or anything else. From Audel, can you share some white papers, case studies on desktop support? Yep, you can go to our website. You can also go to zenofsupport.com and you can download those. Okay. How do you evaluate email handlers and service desks? This is from Paven. The same way you would evaluate anybody that handles incoming calls. You survey the customers. You ask them whether or not they got resolution on first contact or on the first email response, and you ask them whether or not they were satisfied with the response they have. Don't get caught up in the different channels because, whether it's email, fax in, web chat, voicemail, live voice, you're going to be evaluating the customer satisfaction and the first contact resolution rate the same way. First contact resolution rate for email, in the industry, it's generally considered if you get a response within an hour, that's first contact. And that's arbitrary, I realize that, but in terms of measuring customer satisfaction, you're going to do the same thing for your email handlers as you would for your phone agents. And evaluating your email handlers, you're going to want to look at number of emails handled in a month, customer satisfaction for the emails they handle, and the FCR for the emails they handle. How many did they get resolved within an hour of coming in? So the framework, although we talked a lot about voice calls and that sort of thing, applies equally to email handlers. That was the final question. I do want to give anybody an opportunity to type in one more question. If you do have a question, please type it in now. If not, then we'll wrap up our webcast. I want to mention once again, please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. It looks like there are no more questions, so I want to thank you once again for attending our webcast today. Please complete the survey, and thanks to all of you. Goodbye now.